Art One-on-One with Mr. Burgher.
Welcome to another episode of Art One-on-One. I'm your pod boss, Nichole Jordan, alongside your professional artist and master educator, Mr. Burgher.
And, it's hard. Sometimes it's like take 10, but we get through there. We get through it.
We do. Even
through the tongue twisters and the whole thing, we get through it. And I appreciate you as the pod boss deciding to come back again for another episode of Art One-on-One as opposed to Art 101, where I'm on the YouTube and the everywhere.
Basically.
And, of course, not to promote what you're doing, but to promote what you're doing, you're also on YouTube and Instagram and all of those sorts of sites as well for your thing, and Soulful Living Coach.
That's right.
And all of those sorts of things. So I appreciate you and your work with this particular podcast as the pod boss.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm glad you appreciate me.
Well, I do. Thank you.
All right, so before we get started, I want to talk a little bit about last week and my debut as the pod boss.
Yes.
Because I feel like I need a little bit of explanation why I was a little bit nervous behind the microphone.
Well, I think it's one of those things that, I've been making these videos for a long time. I've been making art videos since 2007, before, when YouTube was just a baby. I started making these videos, and if you go back and look at the first videos that I was making, they were not as polished, as well edited. Watch the one on Vincent van Gogh, that the audio is messy. There's a few of them that I've got there's all kinds of glitches and things and technological errors and things that we learn along the way. And so you being a little bit nervous is...
Well, I would say you love being behind the camera where I am.
I love being in front of the camera. You love being behind the camera.
That is true. That's very true.
You like being behind the scenes as a
yes.
Hey everybody, look at me! I'm doing a show. I'm making TV shows.
Okay, we're gonna stop. I hope you're not gonna put that in.
I'm putting that in. This is gonna go in. This part right here is in.
Okay. Yeah.
So.
All right. So.
Because we're having fun, and that's okay. It's okay to have fun with it, and there are certain things that again, being new to a podcast, there are things that I'm learning about the flow of it, and I did have some feedback from one of my very loyal followers, Moose, who really expressed an enjoyment of the more casual, laid-back format of the podcast, as opposed to a little bit more, here are the points, here's the facts, here's the artist, here's the stuff, where it's just kind of like, all right, here's what's going on, and I think that's what I appreciate about having you as the pod boss. I think that's what you definitely bring to the table, in that it's not just me. Hi everybody, I'm talking to myself for half an hour. I have somebody to talk to, and it's maybe less weird. I don't know.
I thought you did great on your own.
It's still weird, but I think that it's important for me to have somebody to have a dialogue with. Right. Dialogue is good, and you bring something to the table that I might not think of. When you're thinking about artists and artwork and things, the ideas that you have as somebody who's not as... you're not thinking about art and interacting with art and studying art and researching art the way that, an insane person like myself does. And so I appreciate comments and the perspective that you bring as we go forward. So
I think it will be cool to bring in, the conversation part of it and the different perspectives, that being able to go over in depth more what you post about and the meaning behind it. And because even like watching the Dali and Disney, I guess my question for you is, why did you post that? Like, what do you want people to learn from that? Or
well, to me, with Salvador Dali, he's such a captivating character. He was just such a kind of a goofy guy. And Walt Disney is a iconic name in animation. I mean, there isn't probably a kid or a human being on the planet that doesn't know or have some connection with or some knowledge of in some way, shape, or form with the Disney products.
Right.
And you take somebody like Salvador Dali, who is a very prominent surrealist, with somebody with Walt Disney's resume, and you fuse those two very strong characters together. I think that it's like, wow, I mean, I think people would be interested by that. And honestly, when I was in high school, I believe, I heard this story that the Salvador Dali and Walt Disney got together to partake in some, as we might say, extracurricular products that may or may not be found in a legal sense. And anyway, I was kind of captivated by that story, like how like Salvador Dali would not be, doing that sort of thing with Walt Disney, and more so vice versa. And I don't know that I ever got an answer to that.
Why or how they ended up
well,
together?
Right. I don't know that story of their collaboration in a extracurricular sort of. There was no information that I ever discovered that said that they had ever actually done anything illicit together to expand their minds. But what I do know is that Salvador Dali and Walt Disney did talk about an animated project. The beginnings of that project were developed, and they came up with it in terms of a final product that came out in 2003. Obviously, Salvador Dali, who died in 1989, did not directly animate that final product, but it was the idea, like we talked about a little bit last week. The vision of the artist, the conception of the idea, and all of these other things that artists do is various forms of making art. The artist doesn't always have every hand in every single component. Walt Disney never drew Mickey Mouse. He was the voice of Mickey Mouse. He whistled Mickey Mouse. He was he was the driving force behind the development of Mickey Mouse, but he never once drew Mickey Mouse. Walt Disney wasn't an artist. He had other people that were the artists that made Mickey Mouse. That's the nature of the creative person, Salvador Dali and Walt Disney did a intellectual collaboration that turned into this short animation that started back in 1946, ended in 2003, but both of them had passed away by the time the end product was produced. So.
Well, I think that a point of that is just how crazy, like, someone can produce something in 1946 and then it doesn't get recognized or published, or he doesn't get the recognition for it until 2003. I think the thing that's interesting behind it is why it got shelved. Like, why, like, what is your perception of why they didn't release it then?
I think because it really wasn't going to go anywhere. My understanding of it, and again, this is somewhat undocumented. I don't really have any hard facts to support this. But it is my understanding that when Walt Disney was starting to develop some of the ideas for Fantasia, he and Salvador Dali had talked about several things. Allegedly, the idea of the ballerina hippopotamuses came from a discussion between Salvador Dali and Walt Disney. Whether or not that is true, I don't. Again, it may be complete folklore that even happened. It may be urban myth that those things happened, but it is my understanding and within the realm of possibility that this may have been an idea that would have been injected into a movie like Fantasia, where there were several clips of classical music that were set to different little stories, and again, I don't know that that's true or not, but
I did think it was cool. I saw that, like, the storyboards of his original work.
Yeah.
And, like, how much work
Yeah.
that was to develop the storyboards themselves before they even started producing it.
Right.
Which you talked about with Bridget.
Richard
Right.
Riley, right.
There's just a lot of work that goes into it before it even gets produced.
All right, so there's a piece of content there. Is there any other one that stood out in your mind that you want to jump into next, or where do you want to go from here? Pod boss.
How about we talk about the Broadway Boogie Woogie?
Okay. Broadway Boogie Woogie was one of my favorite paintings by
That's what you said.
Piet Mondrian. But you say it differently.
Well, yeah, but
Go ahead. How do you? What's your pronunciation?
Piet Mondrian is what, or Mondrian. But I think everything I watched on it, someone said it differently.
And I will say this in terms of all of my videos and all of my content. And this is even very much true for the next piece of content that we're going to look at and talk about with Impressionism, which is what released on the Saturday. But when it comes to names of, if it's Joe Smith, I can say that. If it's, something everyday plain for a dullard American, I can say that. A Dutch name like Piet Mondrian or whatever, for example, I tend to go back to Vincent van Gogh quite often, but Vincent van Gogh's name isn't pronounced Vincent van Gogh. It's actually pronounced Vincent van Gogh. But we don't pronounce, it's a Dutch name. Van Gogh is, not a normal, sound that my face makes. And so when I say Van Gogh, if I was in front of a bunch of students saying, okay, we're going to look at Vincent van Gogh, everybody would be like, ha ha ha, and it would take me 10 minutes to get them back. If I say Vincent van Gogh, it's very Americanized, very blah, as us Midwesterners speak. And so, to be fair, yeah, I have been known to butcher some names. I have been called out for butchering some names. Camille Pizarro, I butchered his name. Benvenuto Cellini is another name that I butcher quite often. So there is no shortage of names that I don't butcher. So I'm okay with butchering Piet Mondrian.
Okay, well, I'm glad we got that.
So now that we got that under control,
we can talk about that, which is Broadway Boogie Woogie.
And you don't like it.
A lot easier to say. You said it was your favorite, and
I said it was my favorite.
One of your favorites.
I said it's one of my favorites of Mondrian.
Oh,
I
hear that part of it.
It's one of my favorites of Mondrian. I would not say that it's one of my favorite pieces of artwork ever created, but I would say that of Mondrian's pieces, I like that one the most.
I think after learning about what it represents, I appreciate it more. But looking at it, I didn't love it until I kind of learned the meaning and how he was bringing in the excitement of New York and the music. And I could feel that when I looked at the painting after I understood it. But if I had to stand there and look at it and just judge it by the actual work,
Yeah.
I didn't love it.
And, I think that that's the real beauty of art. I think that there are pieces that we all find. There are pieces that we all gravitate to or toward. that we enjoy. And there's something for everybody in there. If you like minimalism, there's something for you in Mondrian. If you like landscapes, or you like portraiture, or you like pictures of whatever it is you like, I think that there's something for you somewhere. It's just a matter of discovering what that is.
I don't know. This one specifically is, and I know there's not a million, but lots of different ways to say it, but this is neoplasticism, right? This is what this type of art is. Am I saying that right or not?
Well, you're asking the wrong guy. I'm going to say yeah.
There's different ways, like it was classified different ways, but neoplasticism was what I heard, and it was all around like simple lines, primary colors,
yes.
And that to me, I guess the simplicity of it maybe is what I don't like.
And there's a lot of different areas of thought. A lot of times this would be historically called the Stijl,
Yes.
or the style.
Yeah.
And the Stijl is like the Dutch, obviously, of the style. And there's a lot of things that mean the same thing. It's just saying it in a different way. And we can see that time and time and time again throughout history of art and art history, where there's the same thing being called different things at different times. Paintings being renamed, art movements being renamed. Most of the people that ever made art didn't even know what area of art they were in. Like, for example, Vincent van Gogh did not know that he was a post-impressionist. He wasn't. There was no such thing as post-impressionism, really. I mean, there was, but there wasn't. The Impressionists were a unique group, as they named themselves, but the people of the Gothic time period with their architectures and things like that, they had no idea what the medieval time period was. That didn't exist. It wasn't called that Gothic time period then. It was named by the groups that would follow, and that's how a lot of groups are named. They're named by the group that follows, or the generations that follow.
All right, so at the end of this video, this particular video, you put a quote on there.
To paraphrase into it a little bit, is about the idea of using lines and colors, which Mondrian does. He focuses on using lines and colors in his work, and that is more important. People are more inspired by that, in his view, than they are by actual subjects, like a dog or a cat or whatever it might be, like those other subjects we were just kind of talking about.
Right.
So I guess from your perspective, like, to me, lines and colors, the elements of art, are very, very important. We teach those. I teach those. Art teachers have been teaching those for a long, long time. And we also teach subject matter type content. We teach to draw perspective. We teach to draw spaces. We teach, still lives and landscapes and portraits and blah, 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 blah. But what are you, when you look at a piece of artwork, are you more inspired by the lines and the colors that are there, or what's being represented as the main subject?
Okay, so if I think about the answer to your question, I don't know that I really know how to answer, because I think it would depend on the piece of art I'm looking at. Like,
right.
Whether, like, how I interpret it, how it makes me feel. I think that'd be the biggest thing. Like, if I look at, like, I like bright. I told you the other day, I'm like, you put a lot of dark art. I felt like you put a lot of dark art pieces on, and I'm like, I am not drawn to those at all. I like more color and not so.
Okay, so if I did a drawing of a skull, which is dark,
Mm-hmm.
but I painted it hot pink with neon yellow background, would that be less dark?
No.
So what makes it dark?
Probably
the colors or the subject matter?
both. But what you're saying is that's not true. I get what you're saying.
Right. So are you? So I would say then you're more. Again, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but as I interpret what you're telling me, it seems like you're more inspired by the actual thing that's there. The picture of the dog, the picture of the flowers, the picture of the meadow, the picture of the thing. The colors are important, but what's actually there is important.
Yeah. Yeah, what's presented in the piece. Like Mondrian, I think, didn't he do like a tree where he did it in all kinds of different, I'm sure tons of artists do this, but where it was less abstract and was it Mondrian?
Mondrian that's what he started by doing. He started by drawing trees and making them more and more abstract, and that's how he got to where he went, by pushing the envelope of abstracting a tree more and more and more until it stopped being a tree, and then it just kind of became squares and rectangles of yellow, blue, red with black lines.
I loved the progression of that, whatever that means.
Yeah. Okay, well, fair enough.
Okay, so moving on from my preferences in art and what I like, we're going to move on to the next video and talk about the Impressionist art exhibitions.
Yes.
Started in Paris in 1874.
Yep.
Okay.
And they would continue to 1886. And there was a series of 8 shows, and every month, believe it or not, there's only 8 months left in the year, which is why I started them right now. So every month, I'm going to be rolling out a new video on a new Impressionist art exhibition. So obviously this month we're starting with number 1, and by December we'll get to number 8. So if you bear with me, between now and December, every month I will feature a new exhibition.
Do you think I'm going to stay with you?
Well, my viewers, my loyal viewers, I hope that they will.
No, I'm talking about me.
You might not, but my actual loyal viewers, I hope so.
Sure.
My hope is that other people might say, hey, this is an interesting series. Let me jump on and follow and share and like and hit the thumbs up button. And anyway, so a big components of that, in my mind, were whether or not they were going to let Cezanne in.
Okay.
Because Cezanne we think of as when we think of the big name Impressionists, Cezanne's actually more of a post-impressionist, to be really honest. He's more of a post-impressionist, but he was in that group and he was showing with them, even though he was a post-impressionist. And the reason that he was kind of a post-impressionist is they kind of saw him as an outsider, and they reluctantly let him in. And
so it wasn't because of his art, it was because they didn't like him. He
was a brute. And actually I have another video coming up in the not-too-distant future on Cezanne. So stay tuned for that. Like that one too, because that was good. But they didn't like his views on certain things. They didn't like his... some of the art that he was making was a little bit controversial. Some of the things that he would say and do was a little bit controversial. He wasn't afraid to speak his mind. He was independently wealthy. His parents were pretty well off, so he pretty much didn't have to do anything if he didn't want to. And he didn't care. He was, in my view, he was an artist. He didn't care about selling artwork. He didn't care about exhibitions or shows. He just cared about making the best art that he could make in his perspective. He didn't care if anybody else liked it. He was his own artist, and he could give 2 cents less about anybody else's perspective. And I respect that.
I think that's interesting, though, because the exhibitions were about people really caring about getting their art present and what people thought about it and getting other opinions rather than, correct me if I'm wrong, the old way in salons.
Right.
So it was they wanted
It's actually pronounced... I'm just kidding.
So they wanted to have more control over who saw their work and that, they didn't get judged by one certain person and not, you're out of here. You don't get
Well, and a lot of times there's a misconception that this was a step to try to make the official salon dissolve and go away. That's not entirely true, but it definitely was something that they were. I mean, they wanted to promote their own work, and they didn't feel like they were getting fair representation in the official salon. So that's why this show ended up moving forward, and all of the steps before that, before this was even done, to get to that point when they were finally enough was enough, and they got to that point where they were going to have their own show. But
okay, so not to jump backwards, but so you talked about Cezanne being post-impressionist. I guess I would want you to elaborate. Give me what impressionism is. Like, I don't know that I could describe it if I had to. So
impressionism is basically like this. During that time, and again, it's very, very difficult to go back in time and think about what was what. But this is at the very beginning, the infancy of the camera. Okay? Mm-hmm. So people could set out this device and put in this light-sensitive stuff and open up a hole in a box and close it, take it back and process it, and have an actual image of what things actually looked like. They could have a picture of a tree or a barn or a person, and it looks exactly like them. Like it's an exact replica of that, whatever it was that they were pointing the box at. And so at that time, in the salon, it was very fashionable to have the most realistic artwork. And when you think about art, it's like a spectrum. You have on one side this very, very realistic, and on the other side you have very, very abstract. And so basically think of something like a photograph all the way to something that's just like Mondrian, Broadway Boogie Woogie, or something like that, where it's just boxes and squares and rectangles, and it's like just a non-representation of anything, just feelings and emotions and splatters and whatever. It's nothing. And there's this huge spectrum. And the Impressionists didn't want to be in the photograph world. They wanted to back it up. They wanted to put their own emotions into it. They wanted to have what was the light doing. So when the sun first comes up and the sky starts to look purple, if I was to do a drawing of the sky looking purple, people might say, well, the sky's not purple, you dingy. But they're like, well, at this time of the day, that's what the light was doing. They're trying to not just capture, they're trying to capture the air. They're trying to capture the light, what the light reflecting off at certain times of the day. There were artists like Monet who would draw the same subject over and over and over and over again, capturing the light and how it changed from the morning to the evening, painting the same subject over and over and over again. And how he did that was really fascinating, and we can get into that as we go, because it's a long thing. But just to note that there were artists that were studying light and the effects of light and the colors and how things changed and evolved as they were going forward. And so the Impressionists were trying to put a little bit of their own, I wouldn't say their own emotion into it. That was a little bit more Van Gogh. But to the point, because he was putting his own feelings and emotions into it. But
just so we know, like, I think you should butcher the names.
Well,
do what you're doing.
Yeah, well, you're right.
Maybe the listeners wouldn't appreciate that, but
I'll just be boring. Van Gogh. Anyway,
so speaking of Monet, like he was like the original, or he got termed as the original Impressionist, didn't he?
The thing was, like, when they first, if you watch the video, you'll note that they weren't called the Impressionists right away. That came from a art critic by the name of Louis Leroy, who was saying, I don't like it. This is doing an impression of a painting. It's not a real painting. And so Louis Leroy said, this is not a real painting. It's an impression of one. And the name that he, in that term, impressionist, stuck as a kind of a slight on this group of artists.
Right.
And then as we get there, as you go with me through the months, you'll see where exactly they decide, you know what, we're going to hang on to that name. You know, you might have to wait till summer to get to that part of the story. But let's say by summertime, you're going to know why the Impressionists, how they transitioned from the name that they had to eventually being called the Impressionists. But
I'm on the edge.
I know it's very riveting. But we will eventually get there, and you will see all things come to better understanding. But
well, it kind of makes me think of like music and how like originally you'd hear a song and you're like, I hate that song, and then pretty soon it's like my son will tell you my favorite song, and I play it all the time now. Same thing with Impressionists, right? Isn't that how it went?
To some degree, I think that they were somewhat looked down upon in Europe. They were a little bit more accepted in America, but that would take some time. I've got another video in the works. Maybe by the midsummer, end of summer, you'll find out that story. Be looking out for a video called Vincent van Gogh in America, and where he and how his artwork really did evolve in the eyes of the Americans. It was kind of looked down upon, kind of the same way. But eventually, he became more accepted. The Impressionists became more accepted. There were artists like Mary Cassatt who were doing a lot to promote the work, to get investors and buyers to buy the work. And Mary Cassatt was getting very well-to-do families, predominantly the wives and the women of the family, to say, hey, buy this artwork, not just as a investment for your family, but a sense of protection for yourself. When you're a female at that time in history, you couldn't vote, you couldn't own property, you couldn't do this, you couldn't do that. You had very few rights and very few things that you could do. And so her idea was to encourage these women to buy these Impressionist paintings. And, if your husband leaves you, if you find yourself in a bad situation, you can take these paintings, you can sell them, and you're going to have instant money. And chances are the man of the house might not like them as much as and so it's like, oh, well, take your stupid paintings. I don't want them. And so you take your stupid paintings and you sell them, and you're going to have a way to get cash flow.
So we probably need to wrap up.
Well, one other thing I did want to bring up before we wrap up.
All right.
There was an artwork that was recently vandalized. He wasn't really an Impressionist. He was a realist, but he showed with the Impressionists. Edgar Degas. He made lots and lots of paintings and eventually made a sculpture called Little Dancer Aged 14, of this little ballerina dancer. And there are several versions of this sculpture. And the one in Washington, D.C. was recently vandalized. It stands on a base, and around the base is a plexiglass box. And these individuals that were protesting some sort of climate change thing, which I'm 100% support of. I mean, we have one Earth. We need to protect it. We need to be smart in how we're legislation and the climate, and every government in the world needs to be mindful of what we're doing to our one planet that we all live on. At the same time, I don't think that it's beneficial to raise awareness by attempting to vandalize a piece of valuable artwork that's for everybody, that's been around for hundreds of years. And I mean, granted, they did not actually vandalize the actual piece of artwork. They smeared paint on the plexiglass box and on the base. So the actual artwork was not harmed, but in my mind, it doesn't make it any better. I think that people that want to protest, there's a way to do it.
Right.
People that want to get their voice out or get their perspective out there, there's a way to do it. But vandalizing the Mona Lisa, vandalizing a Vincent van Gogh painting, vandalizing a Degas sculpture or painting or anything else or any other artwork by any other artist, I don't think we need to go down that path to try to prove our point. Even though it gets in the headlines and people look at it.
Well, especially with the means of, start a podcast. There's so many ways to get your, what am I trying to say?
Your view,
what they're standing for, what they're fighting for, to get it out there, besides vandalizing something or doing something. It takes away from what they're doing. It takes away, there's my goodness, there's so many avenues that they can take to reach people now more than ever. So
right, the world is as big as it is getting smaller all of the time with podcasts and YouTube and those sorts of things. We don't need to necessarily raise awareness by being destructive. Let's not be destructive to try to prove a point. I think that's, regardless of what you think about the artwork or the artist, I think that's...
So you're getting life lessons from Mr. Burgher.
Life lessons. Just add it to the list of all of the other things that you're getting for free. So you might as well subscribe and follow and share and all of that.
Yes. So, okay, now are we ready to wrap it up?
We're ready. Pod boss.
All right. So, as you said, feel free to like, subscribe, share, do all of the things. We appreciate that. We appreciate you listening. We hope we spiced it up a little bit this week.
We're having fun with it.
Yeah.
So
thanks for joining us.
You bet. And you have yourself a good day. See you next time.